You are listening to TMI for the week of April 30th, 2018. This week, Dave speaks to Janet McNeill of Durham Nuclear Awareness, durhamnuclearawareness.com. She is that organization's coordinator. We have had her on before, and as usual, we spoke to her ahead of several public hearings she will be speaking at in May and June. Look for related links in our show notes. Janet has been an advocate for responsible public policy for 30 years.
Pickering hearing.
When is that?
Pickering hearing June 26th, 27th, 28th.
And what is it that's happening in May?
May 7th is the deadline for intervening at the hearing. If you're going to do an intervention at the hearing, it's called an intervention. Just means you're going to communicate with the CNSC about the hearing, and
It doesn't mean you can stop anything, can you?
well, we wish that
Why do they pick the word intervene when really they're just telling us what they've already decided to do?
It's true, the CNSC never turns down a license request, so in a sense the hearings are theater, but a lot of good information comes out at the hearings from members of the public, from extremely knowledgeable and intelligent members of the public, including engineers, doctors, PhDs, citizens, mathematicians, you name it. All kinds of people intervene, and they have very intelligent things to say. So a lot is learned, and you meet some really neat people at the hearings. I've made friendships with people that I met at a nuclear hearing. So they're interesting occasions, and we feel we have to take part in them. And usually it's a slam dunk for the industry.
Did I see a news story before, I think it was a meeting that was being held in Durham, and it said no elephants welcome. No elephants invited.
I don't think
They were talking about you.
I didn't see that article.
Get out of town.
Seriously.
I thought you sent it to me. Oh, yeah. Upcoming hearings, we want the public to know elephants are not welcome. I thought you sent that to me.
No.
Oh, okay.
No,
I got to look back and find it.
That would be pretty funny, but...
It was a month ago. You know they were talking about you. And in the article, they said, I think they mentioned that there's a tendency for people to dress up. So they were definitely talking about you.
I have no idea which article that was. Oh, but I know that,
I thought you
when
would
I
have
wear
known
an
that.
elephant outfit, I'm not welcome. I mean,
And no
that's
one
pretty
told
obvious.
you?
No,
So-
I didn't see that.
What a drag. Because, I mean, this is your claim to fame, essentially. And you missed out on being recognized as Ontario's elephant in the room.
There was the CNSC held an information session in Pickering. That was I believe it was in March. I could be wrong. Things are pretty crazy right now, really busy. But they had an information session. It's part of their, routine that they do for their public consultation. They have these information sessions. And when they did this a year ago, when they did this February last year, a couple of elephants did show up, and I was definitely one of them. And the police were called, and, I was escorted from the room by the police. Now, this year, when the CNSC held its information session, the only way they really notify people about these information sessions is they have an information list that a lot of us nerds doing anti-nuclear work are on the list for. So the message came out. It was literally 2 days' notice. The message came out late in the afternoon on a Tuesday about an information session that was being held in Pickering on the Thursday. So it was 48 hours notice. I wasn't able to go. I already had a commitment for Thursday. And then later somebody on the Pickering City Council sort of took a shot at Durham Nuclear Awareness and said we weren't interested in engaging with the CNSC. And of course, none of the councillors had gone to the meeting either, and the councillors aren't on the information list from the CNSC, so they were not aware that there had been only 48 hours notice on the meeting. But when I spoke to them, and when I pointed this out to them, I spoke to Pickering Council a couple of weeks ago, and I said, I wondered if the short notice was because they didn't want any elephants to show up. And I suspect that is why the short notice. They didn't want any disruptions.
Want anyone to show up, really. They just wanted to be able to say, here's another
ticket on the box. We did our...
And the less people that show up, then it means, the public isn't interested, so it writes them a ticket to limit future meetings.
Apparently only about 8 people showed up, and at least 2 of those 8 people were people who went because I told them about the meeting, because as soon as I found out about it, I let lots of people know about it. But most people can't attend a meeting on 2 days' notice. We generally have other events in our lives taking place. So,
is there a hearing in May related to Bruce?
Yes, the Bruce hearing is, I believe it's May 30th and 31st. I may have that wrong because I'm not intervening in that hearing, but yes, there is a hearing.
And that will be about refurb, I assume.
Yes. Refurbishing the reactor.
Where's all this money coming from? Because they're looking to spend, is it $20 to $30 billion one way or another with this Darlington, when all's said and done. That just appears, that money. And, the history in Canada of refurbs is just a story about cost overruns and delays.
Yep.
And now it's Bruce's turn. Where is this money coming from?
I guess the Ontario government gets an awful lot of money in tax dollars.
Right now there's a controversy, I think, with Wynne and Doug Ford. The Conservatives and other parties are claiming that the Liberals have been cooking the books, and they've come up with $5 billion in unreported overspending, apparently. They spend on the nuclear by the 10 of billion. Is that the $5 billion?
It's voodoo.
It's unbelievable.
It's all voodoo, as far as I can see. What I realized a long time ago, I think a lot of us do this. I think we have this tendency as individuals to think, I'm not clever about such and such. And, I've always said I'm not clever about big money and all that kind of thing. But what I've realized sitting on the boards of different groups and just watching different things over the years is I don't think most of us are clever about it. Just meaning that when the numbers get so big, our eyes kind of glaze over and we don't. So I think you can run numbers like that by people. $5 billion. Well, $5 billion, whatever. The numbers are so big, we can't grasp that. It's beyond the regular individual's ability to grasp. And I think another thing that I understand now about government is that most politicians don't have a clue about a lot of the stuff that's going on. They really don't. Not all our cabinet ministers, even the cabinet ministers don't necessarily know that much about their portfolio because they're in and they're out and they're changing. So who's really managing all this stuff? Some small group of bureaucrats somewhere is managing this, and I presume the Premier gets briefed on things, but I'm sure the Premier doesn't know most of the stuff either. For example, I doubt very much Premier Wynne knows how utterly inadequate nuclear emergency planning is. She just doesn't know that. She has to count on her people. She has to have her people inform her, And as it happens, the person who's the minister for that particular portfolio, it's the Ministry of Community Safety and Correctional Services, which it's lumping safety in with jails essentially. And I think they've got so much going on. I think the jail stuff is always so hot that I don't know how much attention is really paid to nuclear emergency planning. So, but the bottom line is the Premier has to rely on her cabinet ministers and her staff people, I guess, and she can't get totally down in the weeds, I guess, on every single thing that's going on. So that's true for any premier of any province or any mayor of any city or, the prime minister of the country. There's too much going on. They can't totally grasp it all. They have to rely on their people, the people who inform them. And I think $5 billion can come and go without anybody blinking an eye. I'm not saying it's not outrageous. It's outrageous. But I think as far as the whole nuclear file goes, the dog doesn't wag the tail wags the dog. The nuclear industry is very, very powerful. And I think, more powerful than people realize. And
I always say the three main parties are equally pro-nuclear. It's never really part of their platform. The style of elections that happen in the last 40 years is to never talk about any kind of issue. I've even called local politicians before an election and asked them, what is your policy on nuclear? And they said that would be revealed after the election.
Wow.
So,
well, the Green Party is very upfront about their policies on nuclear. They would shut Pickering down.
The feeling often is we can't vote for the party we want to, like the Greens, because we're busy voting out or preventing somebody from coming in we're terrified of having.
I know. It's all...
It's going to happen again now.
Oh,
because
yeah.
here in Ontario now, it's Doug Ford, of all people, and Wynne are the two contenders. I guess the NDP, it may play a role. Is it in the polls it goes PC, NDP, and then Liberal? Is that the way it is now?
I'm not sure. I'm not paying attention. I've got my head so up my reports for the upcoming Pickering hearing that I'm not even paying attention to that. And I'm not sure what the NDP has said. I thought they'd indicated they were in favor of Pickering closing in 2020.
Which it already is, basically, right? Anyway, after the Darlington is finished, it is going to close.
Yeah, but they're asking to run till 2024 now.
Right.
And quite frankly, what's going to happen in 2022? Are they going to say, oh, well, now we've changed our minds and we want to run longer? This is a peculiar hearing situation. I heard about this license extension. We heard about this license extension coming not from Pickering, but from the government. The announcement on this came from the government. I don't remember the details now, but I think it was early last year at some point.
That might make sense. If they're in control of the money, then they would have to allocate the money for Darlington, and that they would then know that means keeping Pickering open. And maybe that's why it came from the... my talk with Sean Patrick Stencil a few episodes ago, any normal person would have realized this from day one, but this separation between the federal government and the provincial government in terms of nuclear. And so an example is illustrated when we listen to the federal hearings. We often hear about their mandate or the mandate of the hearings, or if you say something or ask something outside the mandate. And so we put a bunch of issues into the category of the federal role through the CNSC. But Sean Patrick Stencil pointed out, because I was asking about what about should we, or alternatives, or the costs, or morality, or geopolitics, or lessons learned, or the track record. And apparently all those decisions are the province side. And the first thing that came through my mind was, well, funny we don't have hearings to talk about. Should we? What are the alternatives? How much does it cost? What is the track record? The geopolitics, the military implications, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very interested in this. Why isn't, if we have these hearings for federal CNSC licensing, why don't we have hearings that talk about the decisions that the provincial government has to make? Where are those hearings? And now I expect you're going to say, well, there are nuclear emergency management and some Durham, for example, health meetings, and there are meetings that fall into the provincial and or municipal side of things. But their meetings really are, where are they hearings as well?
Yeah, what you're saying is basically it's all completely untransparent.
Mm-hmm.
And that's totally true. I mean, I can't argue with you on that. Even the fact that the hearings seem to have a preordained result every time, that's certainly a lack of transparency. And the way nuclear emergency management works, for example, is very untransparent. Theoretically, the province is in charge of it. But the CNSC sits at all those meetings, and OPG sits at all those meetings, even though it's not the nuclear industry's responsibility. Nuclear industry is only responsible for emergencies up to their own fence line. So why are they at the provincial meetings that run nuclear emergency management? Kind of suggests to me that, again, that the tail is wagging the dog. So the lack of transparency is just all over the place. I mean, I can't poke at anything and say it's transparent, except for maybe the members of the public who speak up and tell the truth and go to hearings and say amazing things. You know, all kinds of revelations and all kinds of facts. And, the public is transparent. I think we need to be more transparent about wanting that plant shut down, though. I'd like to see us be a lot more transparent about that. I'd love to see people in my own neighborhood. I live in the East End of Toronto. I'd love to see people here get a little bit riled up about the nuke plant that's right in our backyard.
You can see it from here, apparently.
Well, from the water treatment plant just down there, you go down there on a fine day and look down the shoreline, and there's the Pickering Nuclear Plant right there. I believe I'm 23 kilometers as the crow flies from the plant to where I live. And that's just basically my backyard in terms of nuke plants. And, you know, if there's an accident.
It's something like 18 miles or something like that.
Yeah, pretty close. I mean, I'm glad I'm a little bit of a distance from it, but frankly, in Toronto, we're just in the backyard. The damn thing's in our backyard.
No, we're just surrounded in every direction by something nuclear.
Yeah, we need to be pissed off about it, and we need to, at the very least, make a lot of noise. I'd like to see a lot of people take part in the hearings, because that has, you know, it's nice to be able to say however many people showed up at the hearing and spoke up about their concerns about the Pickering Nuclear Plant. That matters. It's something that matters. And then you go from there into the provincial election, and, you know, people can make noise then too. The only way things change is if people make noise. Things are never going to change if people are quiet, right? It just doesn't happen.
Has there ever been an election where the word nuclear was even uttered?
I don't know. Probably, but
I doubt it.
Maybe not.
I certainly can't remember one, but then we'd have to look into the 70s when all this was building up. I think the mystery that I find myself, obsessed with is how, one province over, no running nuclear, one province in the other direction, no running nuclear. No other province except New Brunswick has a running nuclear power plant. And nobody finds that weird. Like, you don't need uranium arguments or scientific knowledge. Just when you look at the country and the 40 years that have transpired, if it was a great idea, it would have sprung up in all these other provinces. And we have the most expensive electricity here in Ontario. Nobody figures that out. And all of the punditry that's related to the provincial government and electricity is all about how everybody's in arms about the cost of electricity, and they're just unable to look at the causes. It's all win. In order for you to believe win is the problem, you have to think that the premier before them dealt her a perfect slate on the nuclear costs. And again, 1999, bankruptcy of Ontario Hydro, the largest corporate loss in the history of money for the human species ever, in the history of time in any country ever, was because of Ontario's pursuit of nuclear reactors. They split up, they created OPG, they created Hydro One, and we're all blaming Hydro One and Premier Win for expensive electricity in Ontario. Just unable to do the most basic investigative journalism, unable to ask the difficult questions. There's no critical thinking going on in this whole debate.
Well, you're right. People don't look back. I don't think most people even realize how nuclearized Ontario is. We're excessively nuclearized. These are big plants we're talking about. They're not little plants. Many of the reactor sites, it's my understanding that most of the reactor sites in the U.S. have 1 or 2 reactors. They don't have 4 or 8 in one place. And we've got 8 at the Bruce and 8 at Pickering. Yes, 2 aren't operating, I realize that. And 4 at Darlington. We've got big nuclear plants here.
Yeah, and though there may be other countries with multiple reactor sites, none of them have them all under one roof.
Yep. And the thing that people are not realizing, well, there's a lot of things people aren't connecting the dots about, of course, but one of them is the waste. We don't have solutions for the waste that we already have at these nuclear plants. The waste is sitting at the plants, and it's not as secure as it should be. And I don't think the canisters that are in use are the best canisters. This is information I hear from down in the States. There's a group down in California called San Onofre Safety, and the woman who heads up that group has done a tremendous amount of research on the canisters, and the nuclear industry doesn't want to spend the money. They don't want to spend the money managing the waste properly. And it's sitting right beside Lake Ontario. I'm very concerned about how close to the lake the waste is sitting at these plants. And we know we're having, high water levels, higher water levels than ever before, unprecedentedly high water levels. We're not talking about the waste. However, I think the politicians in Durham region, I'll tell you something about Durham region, and I used to live out there. I spent most of my adult life living in Durham region. And I think people are just complacent. I think they forget the plants are there. And they don't even realize that they're gigantic nuclear plants, because it's like the fish in the water, right? The fish doesn't really go around saying, here I am swimming in water. The fish is just so used to the water. People in Durham region are so used to having those big nuclear plants there that I don't think they really think about it a whole lot. And I think what most people have in their minds is that someday a whole bunch of really big fancy tractor trailer trucks are going to come along and haul that waste off somewhere, because there's going to be a solution, right? We're going to find a nice hole in the ground somewhere to put the waste. Well, good luck on that, folks. That's not going to happen, because every time the government tries to find a place to store waste, nobody wants it. And why would they? Nobody wants a great big nuclear storage facility in their backyard. So the bottom line is the waste is sitting at those plants, and I'll be specific to Durham region, at the Darlington plant and at the Pickering plant. The waste is sitting there. From what I understand, I'm not a really technical person, but I am told by people who know that the used fuel that's in the wet pools, there's a lot of it, and it's not being stored as safely as it should be, and it has to be in those pools for, I think they say 10 years now. They used to say 8 in the last couple of years. Now they're saying 10. And it has to come out of those wet pools and then go into dry cask storage. And the casks, you'll hear the nuclear industry talking about casks or canisters that will be secure for 50 years. And I'm sitting there, I'm reading the reports for this upcoming hearing. I mean, I could pull out the piece of paper and quote from it. They're talking about canisters that'll be secure for 50 years. I'm like, 50 years? But this stuff is going to be dangerous for hundreds of thousands of years. They even say 1 million years now. And you're talking about canisters that are going to keep it safe for 50 years? Like, what? So you've got all this waste sitting at these 2 great big nuclear plants. I know Pickering has about 14,000 tons of waste sitting there. It's probably more than that now, because this figure was from a report a couple of years ago. It's sitting there in inadequate canisters. It's not as secure as it should be from terrorist attacks, for example. It's sitting very close to the lake. It's pretty scary. And as long as we keep using this form of energy, we're creating more waste. And people just don't connect the dots about that. Anyway, I started to say what I think the people in Durham region imagine is that someday some, big fleet of trucks is going to come along and take the waste away, and I'm here to tell you that is not going to happen. The waste is going to be at those sites for a very long time. I think I heard Glenn, I want to say Jaeger, but I think it's Jaeger. Glenn Jaeger is one of Ontario Power Generation's really big head honchos. He makes $850,000 a year. And he spoke at Durham Regional Council recently, and I was there, and I heard what he said. And I believe he indicated to the councillors, to the regional councillors, that the waste would likely be at those plants until 2060. And I think there was some surprise in the room. I don't think people realize the waste is going to be at those plants for that many years. So that's a sobering thing. So we've already got, tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of nuclear waste at both Pickering and Darlington, and we're going to keep running these plants? I mean, give your head a shake.
Canada has 57,000 tons of spent fuel, and the United States has 70. We have a quarter of the nuclear reactors they do, and we have more spent fuel.
How does that happen? That's something I was not aware of. I know there's so many reactors down there. How is that possible? Can-dos make extra waste, do they?
They absolutely
Isn't that
do.
lovely? Can-dos are so special, eh? Can-dos are so special.
They make 100 times the tritium as a US PWR.
Yeah, I've heard about the tritium.
And, and somebody...
Need to shut these suckers down, honestly.
It has to do with the kind of fuel they're using, that it's unenriched and all that. But in the end, spent uranium is spent uranium, and it's nuclear waste. And there's we'll put it in the show notes. There's a great web page by CCNR Coalition.
Canadian Coalition for Nuclear Responsibility.
Gordon Edwards' organization, and it's 210 radioactive elements in 10-year-old spent can-do fuel. So you can take a look at, it's not just one or two radioactive chemicals, it's a whole family of them.
No, and if there's an accident, it's not just one thing that comes out of the plants either. It's a whole array of things. And there's chemical contaminants, as well as the nuclear stuff. It's basically, I don't know, I don't have a good analogy for what this is.
Well,
it's a big, horrible, nasty, awful, indescribable mess.
I want to use nuclear, and I've always thought of nuclear as the best example of our corporate culture, a culture that is not got the public interest as its number one goal. And as we've seen in the last 50 or 100 years, corporations gaining more and more power and influence over politicians, and having the public, put up with cars that last for 5 years before they rust to death. These are all the priorities of a corporation, not the public interest. And we see just so many examples of it. I hold up nuclear as the best example of this incestuous relationship between corporations and government, because it's the main client of nuclear power is government policy, and it's the corporations who are benefiting from it. So there's all kinds of examples in any industry, whether it be fossil fuels or other industries. But because these projects are so many billions of dollars, this is where we see corrupt politicians flock towards, because if they could make 0.001% somehow in some way off this project, when the project is in the tens and 20 billions, it's the big money. I think even in the scandal with Trump, Kushner, Don Jr., Manafort, all these characters in the scandal down there, they were pursuing contracts to sell nuclear power plants in other countries. And why nuclear? Again, because each project is tens of billions of dollars. If you're going to skim off the top, you would skim off a big project, not a little one.
Yeah. Well, there is the weapons connection. That's another thing we never talk about. But I wanted to share a quotation with you about the nuclear industry and politicians. This is from, I'm not sure how you pronounce his last name, Greg Palast. He's an author and investigator. And there's a documentary called Knocking on the Devil's Door. And he says they can buy and sell politicians with our money because we give them billions of dollars in subsidies. And with that billions of dollars in subsidies, they can make Congress get down on its knees and eat out of a dog food bowl.
Yeah, and look at the NRA's influence in the United States. As long as they're directing their money towards politicians, it doesn't become an issue. The gun issue specifically.
The whole military thing, yeah. The whole military. It's huge. I talked to some people one time. Somebody at a dinner party thing I went to said they were trying to find out what states in the U.S. were not really dependent on basically the war machine, weapons making industry, and they couldn't find any. Mm-hmm. It's like every state, they're up to their eyeballs in it. Mm-hmm. And it's about weapons. Mm. It's ugly, and we never even talk about that. There's so many other things to talk about. In fact, I've been thinking, that old Simon and Garfunkel song, There Must Be 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover. I'd love to come up with, a song or a jingle or something with 150 reasons why we should close the Pickering plant. There's just so many reasons. There are just so many reasons. We don't even have to talk about weapons or military or anything else. There's so many reasons to shut down these nuke plants.
Find us on Twitter at @thatarcher, our podcast page, tmi.twxnet.com. Rate the show on iTunes. It changes the way the show is listed.
You went to Chicago recently?
Yes, there was a waste summit in Chicago with, there were only 3 Canadians there, and the rest of the people were there. It was not a huge group, about 70 people, I think. People from all over the U.S. who are dealing with various waste issues in the U.S., and it's very, very sobering. It's very, very sobering. It's the sort of work that people stay away from in droves because it's really seriously awful what's going on. You're talking about communities in New Mexico where very unscrupulous waste companies are situating waste facilities in communities where, it's racialized communities. It's people who are Black, Hispanic, Indigenous, whatever. The regulations are not very good, and these plants or these companies, this is the problem. Gordon Edwards says all the time, we've entered the age of nuclear waste, and we sure as heck have. And so naturally there's all kinds of money to be made from it. So the companies, it's just wicked, the stuff that's going on. It's absolutely wicked.
Kevin Camps was at the meeting you were at?
Kevin was there, yeah. Yep. Yeah, it was a really good gathering.
Yeah, he was on the last episode talking about the cluster of plants, I think in the southern end of New Mexico, right near the border of Texas. And of course, then right over the border, there's a whole cluster in that corner of Texas. And it seems to be this a radioactive nuclear park. He called it a parking lot for nuclear waste because it's an interim thing. There's nothing permanent about any of this.
Well, they're trying to reopen Yucca, and we could go down that road too. People of Nevada will not let it happen, I think. But, the point is, with all of these projects, so we could talk about the DGR that Ontario Power Generation wants to build by Lake Huron for, quotes, low and intermediate level waste. All the while, the hearings went on, and the decision is with the government now. And last I heard, Ontario Power Generation is in talks with, or maybe it's the NWMO was in talks. I get a bit confused about all this, but talks with the First Nations group in the area, Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, because the whole nuclear operation at Bruce is on their land. I guess they ceded some of the land over or something like that. I'm not sure. But anyway, so they're in negotiations with this First Nations group there. But all the while, people are making money, right? People are, I don't know if engineers, in fact, I'm not exactly sure what's going on there. But there's a lot of plans, and there's a lot of people making money out of this. It seems as though the nuclear industry is a great big scheme for engineers and contracting firms to make money. That's what it's all about.
I think I heard at the hearings for the OPG DGR that 10 years before that, so that for 10 years before the hearings, which were a couple of years ago, they had some of the most expensive scientists in the entire nation studying it for 10 years, not alternatives, just citing it at that one location.
Listen,
so
I should...
It's a sandbox for suit dummies. That's what I call it.
I should find a great quote I have. I have the book. I know it's on the shelf over there. It's a David Suzuki book called Inventing the Future, and it was published in 1989. And in it he talks about who most scientists and engineers work for. And he says that the vast majority of them work for the military, and the remainder work for corporations for profit. So we're talking about a thing that most people I don't think are aware of. There's not a lot of independent science taking place on the planet these days. We've got all kinds of science that's being conducted and paid for by the corporations. So they kind of get the results they want.
I've been approached recently by a scientist. I think he was on the TVO episode where CELA, Greenpeace were on the TVO agenda, Steve Pakin's show, talking about a month ago. And the second half of the show, they had a scientist, I think it's the same guy who was bugging me on social media, who had studied the sediment being found in the BC coast that was showing radioactive particles that had drifted over from the Fukushima nuclear disaster. Suggested he wanted to be on the show. But his whole message was against fear-mongering or against people who are citing the contamination as something to be alarmed about. I wasn't hearing him talk about
shutting down nuclear plants.
How the contamination got there. It's man-made stuff from an industrial accident. Like, he's more interested in, I thought to myself, geez, I mean, if I was a nuclear corporation, I'd scoop him up in a second. But he's on the wrong side of it. He's using the evidence they're finding to say everything's fine, rather than using the evidence showing that this material has passed over the entire Pacific Ocean, and here it is. And then a few episodes ago, I had a couple guests on. One of them was Dr. Christopher Busby. They go to beaches, they take their swabs, and they pick up these hot particles on the beach. What about when the sun dries the sand and then the wind blows? We're breathing that. So you find
absolutely.
it on the beach. We don't see the scientists in BC talking about the fact that it's not a good thing that we're finding hot particles in low or high concentration.
Well, when you realize who most scientists, as Suzuki pointed out way back in 1989, if most scientists and engineers work for the military one way or another, and the remainder work for corporations, we're not getting a lot of truth being told, even by the scientific community. And I could talk about that.
Well, there's another thing. You can tell the truth, but you can spin it. It's just like you can do anything with numbers or statistics. And okay, this guy's telling the truth about how many hot particles he's finding, but he's pushing the message in the wrong direction. He's saying, oh, it's great, it's fine, there's nothing to worry about, nothing to see here. Don't be interested. Don't ask any of the tougher questions.
One of the things I'm noticing, too, post-Fukushima accident, is there are some very heartwarming, and they are moving and heartwarming and kind of emotional stories coming out of Japan about people's resilience and so on. And I think resilience is great. I'm all about resilience. I couldn't be happier to find out that we're resilient and bad things make us resilient. But it's a form of spin, in my opinion. It's a form of saying, oh, look, everything here's fine. We had a gigantic nuclear accident and the kids are getting thyroid cancer and people can't live in their communities, or else they're being forced back into their communities even though they're highly contaminated. And they're so resilient. No, let's just shut down the damn nuke plants and not have any more nuke accidents. And let's take some energy and money and deal responsibly with the incredible mess of nuclear waste we have all over this planet. Let's have canisters that are maybe going to be good for more than 50 years, for example.
What kind of preparation do you have to go through to get ready for these hearings that are coming up?
Well, I'm reading OPG's application to the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, and then I'll read the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission staff response that is directed at the commissioners, the tribunal members who will make the decisions. And the Durham Nuclear Awareness submission will focus mostly on nuclear emergency planning, because that's the issue that we focus mostly on. And then writing up a submission and getting it to the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission by May 7th, midnight May 7th. But anybody can intervene, and I really encourage people to intervene. Greenpeace is doing a lot of outreach. They're doing a lot of outreach efforts to get people involved, to help people prepare. Yeah. And, you know, I've said this a million times to people, you don't have to do a PhD thesis. You know, some of the groups do virtually PhD theses. I mean, Greenpeace will have a massive submission. Canadian Environmental Law Association will have a massive submission. Lake Ontario Waterkeeper, Northwatch, etc. Ours, the DNA one, will not be a PhD thesis by any means, but you can write a one-page letter. You can write a letter that's one paragraph, and just list some reasons why you think. I mean, if you think the plant should be shut down, if the nuclear station should be shut down, write about that. And there's information on the Durham Nuclear Awareness site. There's information on the Ontario Clean Air Alliance site. There's information on the Greenpeace site. And if people want to know more about the Greenpeace outreach, I think it's Don't Nuke Toronto. I'm not sure what the site is. I think they use the acronym DNTO. And you can go to that site and find out about their outreach. You know, they're having meetings and webinars and so on. I know there's a webinar. I think it's Wednesday night. Next Wednesday night, there's a webinar. And I'll listen. I mean, I've intervened at a ridiculous number of CNSC hearings by now, but I'll probably listen. And the more people who intervene, the more we can say, for example, to say Toronto politicians, we can say to city councillors, we want that plant to shut down. We'd like you to support us, you know, support the public in expressing the opinion to the provincial government, say that the plant should shut down.
So by presenting at these hearings, it's like voting.
Yep.
In a way. What if you don't meet this deadline and you don't write a written submission and show up and do an oral presentation? You can still show up.
Oh, yes, definitely. CNSC hearings are very enlightening. That's how I became engaged in nuclear work in the first place. I went to my very first Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission hearing in Ottawa in, I think it was the fall of 2006. And I was immediately flabbergasted at what I was seeing. It becomes clear quite quickly what a kangaroo court the hearings are.
You can also watch it on the web.
That's
they have
right.
a live webcast.
Yep.
And if you miss that, about 2 weeks later, the webcast is made available on their website.
Yep. And often, I don't know if it's Greenpeace. I think it may be Greenpeace who does this. They'll often do short YouTubes and put them up too of various presentations. So there are a lot of different ways of taking part, for sure. And I just encourage people to pay attention and connect the dots and think about whether you want to have a Fukushima or Chernobyl type accident in our backyard here. And, you know, maybe it's time to speak up.
There's a lot of talk about this Fermi. And Fermi is on Lake Erie. I think I thought that was part of why you went to Chicago, was to talk about Fermi, but maybe not. No. Kevin Camps had done some type of intervention and some kind of lawsuit to try to slow that new build down. But and then I was kind of shocked to realize that, you know, the Ontario town near it, Amherstburg. And then I was just poking around the earthquake site. So listed as one of the 4 most important earthquakes in Canada recently was at Amherstburg.
Yep.
A 4.1.
Right at the very time that a public meeting was taking place in Detroit about KI pills being, you know, what's happening is that Greenpeace in Canada is trying to promote the idea in the States with the groups down there that people down there should be getting KI pills as we are here. I mean, it's now mandated that if you live within 10 kilometers of one of the reactors, you'll get KI pills sent to you in the mail. Potassium iodide pills. They're to protect your thyroid gland from, I never remember. I'm not good with the isotopes. Is it iodine 137?
I think I think it protects against all of the isotopes of iodine. Just by loading you're full of iodine, you're not going to uptake any more of it.
Right, and the whole idea is to prevent thyroid cancer, which is important because of the thyroid cancers that we know occurred in Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus after the Chernobyl accident, and the children in Japan are getting thyroid cancer at scary rates too because they did not have the KI pills ahead of time. But anyway, so the idea is to encourage groups in the States to ask for regulations similar to ours, which are completely inadequate, of course, because everybody should probably be getting the pills out to at least 50 kilometers, if not 50 miles, according to the American Thyroid Association. I have a wonderful handout from the American Thyroid Association about the distance out that people should be getting KI pills pre-distributed.
I think I saw just in the last couple of days that they had decided to give out KI pills in Amherstburg.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw that too. Yeah, there's...
And Lake Erie is dotted with nuclear power plants, just like Ontario is, on not just the Canadian side, but on the American side. And we just seem to love to locate these ridiculous plants right where we have most of our drinking water. I never understand that.
By the ocean or by the lakes or by the rivers, whatever, yeah, because they need to use a lot of water and then they pollute the water. And I mean, one of the big things that just blows my mind, and I just try not to think about it, to be perfectly honest. There's a lot of things in life we have to not think about, I guess, if we're going to stay sane. But one of the ones I try not to think about is the fact that if there's a nuclear accident in Durham region at either the Darlington plant or the Pickering plant, Lake Ontario is going to be probably devastated almost immediately. And Lake Ontario provides drinking water for 10 million people, so I understand, on both sides of the border. And it's not the size of an ocean. Lake Ontario is not the size of an ocean. I mean, the Fukushima accident, from what I understand, has devastated the Pacific Ocean. And if we have an accident here, our own drinking water supply will be ruined quickly. And then what are we going to drink?
Yeah, well, we almost don't really value water here in Canada because we think it's ubiquitous, essentially. And, if you move away from the lake, people are getting it from wells, etc. But, our population does concentrate on the Great Lakes and on the St. Lawrence Seaway. And it's just an interesting mental experiment to think about making that transition from taking water for granted to having to go shipping it from great distances just to drink water.
I drink water from the tap. I do. And I don't think about it. I try not to think about that. It's probably got lead in it too, and I try not to think about that too.
Here I know. All from the corporations, just saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, corporations.
Yep.
In this culture of corporatism that we've evolved into.
Corporations are in charge of a lot of what goes on at the universities now, which is something I've only realized fairly recently. They sponsor a lot of the research at the universities, so the universities have become arms of the corporations.
In last week's show notes, I put out an article, which to me is a famous article, about the University of Saskatchewan taking money from corporations. And of course, Saskatchewan is the center of uranium mining in Canada. And it's like something, follow the yellow brick road.
Yellow like Cake Trail?
Yeah, well, there's an Anna Tillman article of a similar name, but this is an article written for Briar Patch magazine, which we'll put in the show notes as well. But they're taking money from corporations, and the universities are pumping out papers So it's like they're selling papers to the giant corporations. And, it's some kind of shakedown, essentially. Whether the universities are so desperate for money that they have to publish these papers, or the corporations are so desperate to be greenwashed, they're buying papers from the university.
Yeah, the whole thing of the universities was something I was just not aware of until quite recently. I could give you a great quote about that, and I'd love to read it out because it's fantastic. But yeah, science has become, unfortunately, quite corrupted. Because, of course, he who pays the piper calls the tune. If you've got a pharmaceutical company, for example, paying for the research and promoting a particular product, you are not necessarily getting really independent science on it.
It really sounds like, you're getting tinfoil hatty and doom and gloom and pessimistic and conspiracy theory. But I am personally going to spend more time thinking about what the effects of our culture gravitating towards corporation really means. And so an example in the United States is that Citizens United, where they're essentially giving corporations all the rights of an actual person. And of course not being held to any standards or writing laws that hold corporations to protect the public interest in exchange for all these new. And then if you keep turning the clock forward and ask yourself, where does this wind up? And then we look to the south and look at the kinds of people that are being picked to control, like the EPA. We take an oil guy and put him in charge of
nightmare. Nightmare.
And this is what I mean when I say looking forward to see what the effect is decades later of being, of not fighting against this takeover by corporations in our politics and in our just probably in our regular lives. And again, I always think that there's no better example than nuclear, because the projects are so big, there's so much money goes around. You point out that it goes to the politicians. It circumvents our vote by meeting our message on its way to the politician.
And the thing is, I actually spoke just recently with somebody who worked for a brief time for the nuclear industry. In one of the dirty jobs, I would point this out. This would be something not everybody would necessarily think through. But I tend to encounter the big hot shots from the nuclear industry at things like Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission hearings. So I'm encountering people who are making, multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars for their jobs, and they have very, 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 very expensive, attractive suits, and they have good jargon and lingo, and they're smooth and all these things. And I don't think those people ever go near anything dirty at the nuclear stations. But I know people who do I have met some people who have been in jobs where they have encountered the nasty stuff. And I spoke to somebody recently, and, I used the phrase golden handcuffs. You're making money so good. I don't think anybody who works for Ontario Power Generation makes less than $100,000 a year. I'm not aware of there being anybody who works for OPG who makes less than $100,000 a year. They pay people really well. And then that's what you call golden handcuffs. You've got a really good salary coming in, really good paycheck coming in, great benefits. You're going to get a great pension down the line. And so you just kind of shut off the critical faculties in your mind and collect your paycheck. And that is happening in so many parts of our society now. It's not just the nuclear industry, it's all over the place. Pay people really, really well, and they'll kind of say or do anything, and keep saying or doing anything as long as those paychecks roll in. So it's...
Did you go up to the Chalk River hearings that happened a couple months ago?
I did.
How did that go?
Oh, it was fabulous. The interventions made by the members of the public were absolutely fabulous.
I watched some of them on the web.
Very hard-hitting ones.
Yeah.
talking about, for example, the companies involved in the consortium that's running things at Chalk River. And we're talking about S&C Lavalin, and I can't remember the name of the other firm. But these people are under a cloud of law breaking, courts and stuff. I mean, this is not who we should be dealing with to have doing things that are nuclear.
And it's almost like the law
plants.
stops at the gates, because if Lynn Jones pointed out, they're burying nuclear cores in the sand where it just rains and the water just runs through it. I mean, that sounds illegal. It's like it's a no man's land of law. It's the Wild West as soon as you get to the gates.
It absolutely is the Wild West. It absolutely is. The stuff that's going on
and
all over the world. It's terrifying.
The reason for that, like if that sounds crazy, is because the CNSC is responsible for all things nuclear. So they're the law of the land. So normal law stops at the gates.
Yep. And of course they got their license, right? They were asking for a 10-year license. They got the license.
But that's a bit of a surprise.
Not. But fabulous interventions. I have to say I was moved and impressed by the quality of the interventions. It was amazing.
So I reached out to you to get word to Candace Nouveau. And I actually talked to you. I said, I recorded this portion of the webcast of the hearings, and there was this great speaker, Candace Nouveau, an Indigenous lady from the area, and I was all set to post it. And you said, oh my God, don't do that.
Get her permission.
Because was she actually saying in the parking lot, I barely have permission to use this stuff. I got permission from the band to speak on their behalf. Don't use my words and stuff without talking to me. And I was about to just post it, because I own the whole world, and were it not for you speaking some sense to me. So anyway, so you helped reach out and get permission to use that in a cold opening to Ole Hendrickson's interview I did with him after his presentation at Chalk River.
And they were in New York City this past week. Candace and Ole Hendrickson and Dr. Gordon Edwards and several First Nations leaders were at a United Nations event in New York City on Monday, April, what would that have been, 23rd? Mm-hmm. They were down in New York City to speak about First Nations communities feeling they're having waste foisted on them when they don't want it, which is against all kinds of rules.
And no one can believe how poorly we deal with nuclear waste here in Canada. The IAEA...
We're not abiding by IAEA rules, and that was part of the central premise of this whole thing. Was a bunch of groups have actually written to the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, to say Canada it's the Wild West here. We're not abiding by the rules. They're not abiding by the rules at the Chalk River facility for what they're going to do with waste there, or White Shell out in Manitoba, or the third one is Ralphton, I guess, which is just up the river from Deep River.
And every chance they get at these hearings, they cite IAEA best practices.
And then they're not abiding by them.
These hearings coming up, extending the license of Pickering so they can get away with doing their Darlington refurb. All of the electricity coming from Pickering essentially is surplus anyway. Mm-hmm. And we've been just giving it to the United States at a huge loss.
Yep, that's correct.
You can't make this stuff up.
No, it's true. There's a lot of that in this. When you get into this, you read stuff and you couldn't make it up.
I'm hoping to have Lynn Jones on in a future episode. She at the hearings. This is why people should just listen to these hearings. And I've said this before. All of the incredible stuff that I've heard about nuclear, I've heard from these hearings. And it was Lynn Jones who got up and pointed out this burying of reactor cores just in a sand pile.
Yep. And
when the question was posed to the CNSC and the people there, she seemed to be the only person who knew anything about it. That's just...
You know, a really important issue that most people wouldn't be aware of. First of all, I think most people aren't really aware that the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission exists in the first place, but it is the, quotes, nuclear regulator for Canada. I put it in quotes because they don't really regulate the industry. They're a little too cozy
forms
with the industry. But the way the CNSC operates is they have a tribunal or a commission, and these are the people who make the decisions. So when a hearing happens, what you have at the hearing is you have a whole bunch of nuclear industry people from, say, Ontario Power Generation, and you have a whole bunch of Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission staff members, but up at the front of the room at the big head table, there's the tribunal members. So the whole idea of all of this is the tribunal members need to hear all this stuff, and they're going to make the decisions. But what we've learned in the last couple of years is that the tribunal members are not always fully informed because the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission staff is not giving full information. So this tribunal is making decisions about things, and they don't have all the facts.
And they're also limiting the presentations that people make.
Oh, well, we get 10 minutes.
You know,
we get 10 minutes, and the industry has limitless amounts of time. But it's really important for people to understand that these tribunal members are not always being given all the facts. So they're making really big decisions about really important things, and they don't have all the facts. It's
so these other entities
sobering.
That get a lot of airtime on in these hearings, they're called stakeholders. We should be a stakeholder.
Yeah.
Shouldn't we get half the day to make points? I'm just saying.
Well, when you go to a hearing, what you'll see, and this is why, on the one hand, the hearings kind of make me crazy because I feel that a lot of lies are being told, and I have a hard time sitting in rooms where a lot of lies are being batted back and forth for hours on end. I find that it makes me feel a little bit sick. But what can be really uplifting and inspiring is hearing all the incredible testimony from the members of the public who are really smart and really, it's somewhat, takes a bit of courage to go and speak to the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. And you're witnessing all this incredible courage and energy and intelligence, and it can be quite inspiring.
There was a young guy, who got up and spoke, sort of representing the millennials.
At the Chalk River hearing?
That's right. Do you remember his name?
I don't remember his name, and I did not meet him. He's not somebody I know, and I didn't meet him. I've got...
I called him Elijah Woods, and he was obviously not Elijah Wood. Oh, God.
Was it Kalen?
Yes.
Kalen something. I don't remember his last name.
I
don't actually know him.
I have the name down. Maybe I'll add it in post editing, but I'd like to make mention of him. You're talking about these moving hearings, these moving presentations we're hearing at hearings. There's Candace Nouveau speaking for Indigenous people.
Oh, there was another young woman there who was absolutely amazing. Tears in my eyes she was an Indigenous person from Peterborough, I think, and I don't remember her name either because I'd not met her before. Very inspiring and moving.
Yeah.
She did sort of a poem and song about the river, and I happen to rather adore the Ottawa River. I lived up there for several years on the Ottawa River, and the Ottawa River is very special.
Well, this young guy who was in his, I guess, maybe he's looked 20, maybe he was less than 20, just, typical. Spoke really well, spoke from the heart, had nothing to do with uranium-235 or 238, was talking about all the other ways to look at it. But it really felt like he summed up what a lot of other young people are thinking about it, because he was talking about the basic concepts. And I think that's something that needs to be brought up, is that, the complicated presentations that are done by large organizations where they can hire scientists to beef up their presentations full of facts about the actual mechanics of the process are fine and great. But there is such a value in hearing just regular people get up and make their comment about it.
I agree. I
They're
couldn't agree
way
more.
more moving and emotional.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I agree totally.
So
I know I have a friend once who's, I've been friends with this woman for a really long time. And her daughter came to one of the hearings and presented, and that was amazing. You know, she was, I don't know, between 25 and 30 at the time, and it's great to hear regular people.
If it was
very moving.
If it was a court, I mean, a lot of weight does go on how convincing the person is and how their presentation is. And you know what? Sometimes they just feel way more, they have more impact, they're more believable than a science-based argument. Yep. And I keep thinking to myself, because you hear this when you're debating with pro-nuclear, just because we can, or just because you understand the physics of what degrades to what, that has nothing to do with, is this a good idea?
Well, and I'm here to tell you, you can read the documents from the industry, as I have been doing, and you do not have to be a rocket scientist to see how nonsensical a lot of what they're saying is. You could read, for example, just the executive summary of Ontario Power Generation.
You're holding up a piece of paper that it looks like a 7th grade teacher has written all over it in red markings and comments and circled notes, all in the margins.
Yeah, so it's the executive summary.
I'm glad I didn't write that, because I don't know what the mark... Okay, what's the mark on that? What would you mark that as?
I didn't...
Out of 100, what does that page mark as a...
Well, what's marked is the number of times that the words safe and safety are repeated.
Wow.
In a short executive summary. It's 2 1/3 pages. The words safe and safety are used 39 times in 17 paragraphs. There's one sentence that has the words safe or safety used 4 times in one sentence.
Danger or leak, waste, accident,
but
harm,
when you
pollution.
read this,
is there any pollution in there?
No. What becomes apparent when you read this executive summary is OPG's safety policy. And the safety policy, from what I can gather, is if we say safety enough times, the plant is safe. So it's safe, 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 safe. And it's safer than it was last year, and it's going to be even safer next year, which is logically inconsistent. I mean, if the plant was totally safe, how can it get safer? How can you make safety enhancements that are going to make it safer 2 years from now if it's safe now? I mean, does this make sense?
My grade 8 teacher said to the whole class, if you keep wondering why I keep repeating myself, there's a psychological study out that says... That has to end. There's a psychological study out that says if you have to tell kids or people things 21 times to have any hope that it penetrates into their head. And so, how many times in that page does it say?
39 times in 17 paragraphs. And let me see. Page 1 has the words 18 times. Page 2, 16 times. And there's an unhappy face on the last page because it's only 5 times, but it is only about 1/3 of the page.
Well, it must be pretty safe then.
I think the plant must be safe if they say it so many times.
Yeah.
So I really, really trust these guys because their safety policy is, we say it's safe, therefore it's safe.
What's it like being at these hearings? What happens? You go there. They've made it hard for you to go there.
Oh, that's right. They've put the hearings out in Curtis, for heaven's sake. The last time there was a hearing in Pickering, which was 2013, it was right in the main part of Pickering, right by City Hall and the library and right close to the GO station. You could walk to it from the GO station, 8-minute walk maybe from the GO station. So really conveniently located last time. This time the hearing is being held out in Curtis, out near the Darlington plant. Very almost inaccessible. It is accessible by public transit, but it's not an easy access. You got to take GO buses and GO trains and then get off a city bus and walk 1.3 kilometers from the... So if you're going out from Toronto on transit, it's gonna take you a while.
That's done on purpose, obviously.
Clearly.
I think you sent around a note criticizing them for not being able to book a proper venue with all the resources and money of the federal government at hand, they had to pick a location that's 60 kilometers away from Toronto. It's sad.
It's a deliberate ploy to keep people away. I'm sorry. I cannot see it any other way.
Okay. So, let's say you make it to the hearings. So you show up, you go through the doors. There's some reasonably friendly cops there to make sure you're not
carrying any bombs.
Okay. And you go in and you sit. It's often the first part of the day is the proponents.
Yeah, the very first, it depends. This is going to be a 3-day hearing, right?
Okay.
So the first day, the first several hours will be Ontario Power Generation presenting, and then Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission staff presenting.
Helping the presentation of the proponent.
That's right. And that'll probably take the first several hours. And then it'll start getting into people from the public. I have to say to you that it's really, really inconvenient for somebody like me who feels obliged to attend the entire hearing. You can't even get coffee there.
I know.
There's nowhere to get coffee. There's nowhere. We are talking about, this is a rural location. There's nowhere to go for lunch. There's nowhere to go for supper. All of the proponent people, the Ontario Power Generation people and the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission people, are catered. It's a really nice church. It's a beautiful, beautiful church, actually. And those folks get their meals catered. But we peasants, we can't even get ourselves a cup of coffee. It's actually insulting.
Too bad we can't chip in and have like a coffee truck even. In the parking lot.
It's a great idea. This whole thing is being conducted with our tax dollars.
I know, that's
and
the beauty.
And we can't even get a cup of coffee.
Listen, I went to the hearings a couple of times. I had to get in my car and drive. I'm saying 10 kilometers to a corner store to get shortbread. Yeah.
I'm trying to remember now where the places are. I think you go up, is that Trulls Road? I've been to this location quite a few times, so.
If you just drove
I think you go up
west.
Trulls Road to something or other, and there are a few things up there.
Okay, well, I drove
Or else
west.
you can go into Oshawa. But you don't want to go all the way to Oshawa if you don't have to. But there's not a lot up that Trulls Road thing, Trulls and whatever it is up there. Highway 2 or... I'm not good with the names of
And if there was
things.
anything, I think the CNSC would close them down for the day to increase.
No, it's... whereas the Pickering location, as I say, it was easily accessible by GO Transit. It's right near a great big shopping mall, so if there's a break or whatever, you can go over to the shopping mall and there's food in there. And
well, I think there should be a coffee truck, and I think a hot dog. There should be popcorn in the parking lot. There could be a whole host of...
You never know what might go on in the parking lot.
Yeah.
You just never know. You never know.
Will there be elephants, do you think?
I don't know. Don't know.
One funny
Elephants don't always tell you their schedule.
Right. One funny thing that was said at one of the last Darlington hearings I was at this Curtis,
yeah.
Church. It's set in a church. Maybe there's the odd funeral there. And somebody said, and because it was, we're still fresh after the Fukushima accident, that it was like a funeral for the nuclear industry.
Should have been a funeral.
Holding it in a church.
I pulled something off the wall. There was a cute thing on the bulletin board. I'm not going to get the words exactly right. I did enter it in my intervention. I wound up saying it. There was a bulletin board down the hallway towards the washrooms, and it was something about how we tell the truth in this location. This is a church, and we tell the truth to one another. And I actually took it off the wall, and I took it in and said something about it. I said, this is so ironic. This is a church, and you've got this lovely, heartfelt thing by some kid. It was obviously a kid who'd said this thing, and it was on the bulletin board. And I don't know what else I said, but... the lies are thick and fast at these hearings, so it's pretty ironic There's so many ironies in this. I mean, it's just irony upon irony, really, that we're paying for the whole proceedings. We're paying to be insulted, and
we're
treated as peasants.
Polluted.
We're paying to be polluted. We're stuck with the waste in the end. We're stuck with the consequences if there's a nuclear accident. And then they'll tell us to just stay in our homes because, evacuations are too dangerous. So just stay at home and, be resilient. And then they'll up the levels of allowable exposure and, blah, blah, blah. There's a playbook. Post-nuclear accident. And it's happened before. It's happening in Japan. And it's going to happen here if we have an accident. Well, Durham Nuclear Awareness has been raising information about nuclear situations ever since after the Chernobyl accident in 1986. And DNA was calling for better nuclear emergency plans way back in the late 80s. So they were calling for an expansion of the primary zone and an expansion of where KI pills, I shouldn't say an expansion of where KI pills were pre-distributed, because the KI pills were not being pre-distributed back then. But DNA was calling for pre-distribution of KI pills to everybody in the 30-kilometer zone by the end of the 1980s. So this group has been trying to inform people about these situations for a really long time.
And your website?
DurhamNuclearAwareness.com.
How do we reach you on Twitter?
@DurhamNucAware.
Are you all Facebooky and all
Instagram-y?
Instagram-y?
Not Instagram. I post a lot of stuff on the Durham Nuclear Awareness Facebook page. And that gets frequent postings.
And what's the handle for that?
Durham Nuclear Awareness on Facebook.
Okay.
Yeah. Lots of frequent postings about news items on that Facebook page.
That was Janet McNeill. She represents Durham Nuclear Awareness. Check out our show notes for links to what they're working on, her organization, contact information, and how to get involved. Dave spoke to Janet McNeill at her home in Toronto. Find us on Twitter @thatarcher. Send us an email, archer@twxnet.com. For guest links and contact info, visit our podcast page, tmi.twxnet.com. Find us on Android and Apple Podcast apps. Subscribe and rate the show on iTunes.
I'm Dave Archer.
And I'm Janet McNeill in Toronto.